I never thought a quiet guy like me would ever become the target of office politics. I wasn't ambitious, I wasn't pushy, and I never tried to outshine anyone. I just did my job. That was my whole philosophy. Keep your head down, work clean, don't give people reasons to use your name in conversations you're not supposed to hear. But the truth is, people like me don't avoid trouble. We simply don't notice it until it's already wrapped halfway around our throat. And the night I found out what my boss and the CFO really thought of me, that's exactly how it felt. Like I'd been sleepwalking straight into a trap someone dug long before I even arrived. It started with the numbers. Small things at first. A vendor invoice that didn't match the budget line I had prepared. A credit adjustment that seemed too perfectly timed to fix an overspend I didn't remember approving. A missing line item that reappeared 2 weeks later, but under a different department code. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed sabotage. More like static. Something faint, irritating, but not loud enough to make you stop the whole machine just to look for the source. My job was operations budgeting. Not glamorous, not powerful, but essential. My boss, Mark, liked to introduce me as the guy who makes sure our money doesn't set itself on fire. He said it with a chuckle, like a compliment. I used to smile back. Now that line tastes different when I remember it. We had quarterly reviews coming up, and I was double-checking expenses for the last 3 months. Everything felt slightly off. Not broken, just misaligned. The kind of misalignment that only happens when someone moves things around without telling the person who actually tracks them. I reread the reports 3 times, recalculated projections, checked approvals. Nothing added up cleanly, but every error seemed just small enough to blame on human oversight, so I blamed myself. I wish I could say that was the moment I confronted Mark, or that I demanded explanations. But no, I swallowed it, like every other quiet employee does when something feels wrong but not wrong enough to light a fuse. That fuse lit itself later. The night everything shifted was a Thursday. Most of the office had already gone home. Only the finance team and a few project managers were still around, rushing to finalize the quarterly packet for the CFO. I stayed late because I believed staying late meant reliability. Now I know. Staying late only means you're available to overhear things you were never supposed to hear. I went upstairs to hand off a revised projection sheet to Mark. His office was at the end of a hallway the cleaning crew hadn't reached yet. The lights dim, that empty after-hours echo in the building. His door was cracked open. I almost knocked, but then I heard laughter inside. Mark's voice, and someone else's. Deeper, smoother, unmistakably the CFO, Patterson. I froze, sheet in hand, because something in their tone made my instincts go still. Seriously, Patterson was saying. He has no clue? Not even a suspicion? Mark laughed harder. None. He's so damn naive it's almost a shame. We drained his entire budget pool for Q3 and he still thinks he miscalculated somewhere. I swear he second-guessed himself instead of asking questions. My throat tightened so sharply I felt it click. I didn't move. My heartbeat did that thing where it suddenly feels higher in your chest, like it's trying to hear better. Patterson added, Good. Last thing we need is pushback while we reroute to my department. Legal's already smoothing the narrative. When the review hits, we'll just say his unit underperformed. Budget mismanagement practically writes itself, Mark snorted. And he'll accept it too. He always does. I mean, come on. If he were any softer, we'd have to water him twice a week. He's the easiest employee I've ever had. I felt something in my chest drop. Not break, drop. Like the floor had just shifted under me and my body was trying to catch up. Patterson continued, lowering his voice. He'll probably resign on his own after a few months of pressure. Saves us severance. Just keep giving him new deadlines and fewer resources. He won't fight back. Mark hummed in agreement. Yeah, he's too quiet to cause trouble anyway. Quiet. That word stuck in my ribs like a nail. I didn't hear the rest. My brain was too loud. My hands were shaking just slightly. Not from anger, but from the shock of realization. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't me missing something. This was deliberate. This was planned. I stepped back from the door, careful, quiet, ironically quiet, and walked down the hallway as if I'd been there by accident. The projection sheet was still in my hand, but I barely felt the paper. I remember entering the elevator and watching the doors close, seeing my reflection in the brushed metal. My face didn't look angry. It didn't even look hurt. It looked blank, like someone who just realized the story he thought he was living was actually a stage set for someone else's performance. I drove home without music. I showered without noticing the water temperature. I sat on my couch with the lights off and went through every interaction with Mark over the last month, replaying it with new context. Every forced smile, every "don't worry about it," every meeting where he'd subtly implied I wasn't keeping up. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because something inside me had shifted. Not broken, not snapped. Shifted. Like a gear that had finally moved into place after grinding for too long. And by morning, I wasn't the same quiet employee they thought they could starve out of his own job. But that was only the beginning of what I would uncover next. The morning after that conversation, I walked into the office like a man who had been handed a script for a play he didn't realize he'd been performing in. Everything looked the same. The soft hum of the HVAC, the fake succulence on people's desks, the smell of burnt office coffee drifting from the break room, but nothing felt the same. I saw things differently now, as if the fluorescent lights were harsher, the voices sharper, the footsteps louder. A kind of clarity I never asked for had settled into me. Mark greeted me with his usual cheerful tone. "Morning, champ. Got that revised forecast ready?" I handed it to him without looking away. His eyes flicked over the numbers, smiling like nothing in the world was off. For a second I wondered how many times he'd stood in front of me, pretending everything was fine while quietly carving pieces out of my department. That subtle irritation, the kind that grows behind your ribs, started burning. I went back to my desk and opened the Q3 master sheet. At first glance it looked clean, neat, the kind of spreadsheet that would impress anyone who didn't know what the numbers were supposed to look like. But now I knew exactly what to search for. I started clicking through the transaction history, export logs, old attachments, archived versions. It felt like opening drawers in a house you'd lived in for years, suddenly noticing scratches on the floor that weren't there before. 15 minutes later, the first anomaly surfaced, a vendor payment that had been approved under my name, on a day I wasn't even in the building. My signature was copied from an old template. Neat, precise, convenient, the kind of forgery that could only be done by someone with internal system access. I checked another one. Same story. The irritation sharpened. There was a line item moved from my department to Strategic Finance Initiatives, Patterson's domain. But the date stamp showed it was originally logged under mine and retroactively edited. Whoever did it tried to bury it under a pile of adjustments, but the digital footprint was still there. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. Carefully placed, carefully hidden, carefully timed. How long had this been happening? How much money had they siphoned off before I noticed the smoke? I opened the archive folders, some of which hadn't been touched since last year. The deeper I went, the darker the trail became. Transactions that didn't belong. Expenses that were never discussed with me. Reallocations approved with timestamps that made no sense. Each file, each line, each discrepancy felt like another hand grabbing at my patience. Just before lunch, Mark stopped by my desk. "Everything good?" he asked, casually leaning on the cubicle wall. Everything in me wanted to look him in the eye and ask how long he'd been smiling in my face while dismantling my work behind my back. But instead I said, "Working through some old reconciliations." "Oh?" He raised an eyebrow. "Anything interesting?" "Not yet." A lie, but a necessary one. He nodded and walked away, humming to himself. And that sound, that thoughtless, light hum, irritated me more than anything else. He was relaxed, comfortable, secure in the belief that I was exactly who he assumed I was. Compliant, soft, unobservant. The afternoon dragged, heavy with a new kind of anger I wasn't used to feeling. I wasn't explosive. I wasn't impulsive. But this wasn't about temper. It was about being violated professionally, your integrity pulled apart while someone laughs about it in a room you weren't supposed to be near. Around 3 p.m., I dug back into old email chains. There was a thread between Mark and Patterson from 2 months ago. I wasn't copied on it, but the forwarded message had been accidentally attached to a file I worked on. The preview pane showed Patterson asking, "Can we shift another 40K from operations? Keep it subtle." Mark had replied, "He won't notice. Trust me." My hands went still on the mouse. That sentence? It wasn't just disrespect. It was certainty. The certainty that I would blame myself before I ever blamed them. The certainty that I wouldn't question authority. The certainty that I didn't know my own value. And the worst part? They had been right. Until last night. I kept scrolling. There were more emails, more edits, more pieces of the puzzle falling into place. By the end of the hour, I had a folder on my desktop labeled discrepancies. It wasn't a plan yet, just documentation. Facts. Proof. Something to anchor me so I didn't start thinking this was paranoia, but every new file made the irritation grow deeper, sharpening into something heavier than anger, contempt. When the office started thinning out, Mark called out, "Don't forget the budget briefing tomorrow. We'll want clean numbers." Clean numbers? I almost laughed. On my way out of the building, I saw Patterson in the lobby. He didn't even look at me. Why would he? To him, I was just a name on a spreadsheet, a pawn he and Mark could shuffle around without consequence. He walked past with a phone to his ear, saying, "No, it's fine. The shift's already invisible." Invisible. Another nail. I drove home, but my mind stayed looping through every discovery. The weight of injustice didn't make me reckless. It made me focused, clear. I spent the evening exporting every file legally available through my access level, backing things up, cross-referencing numbers, tagging dates. Not because I was planning anything yet, but because something inside me had clicked. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. And I sure as hell wasn't going down the quiet path they prepared for me. At midnight, I found one more document. A hidden approval note. Mark had moved funds using an internal override only department heads were supposed to use, and he'd done it 3 times. Each action was routed through the CFO's permissions. My chest tightened with the realization that the scheme wasn't small at all, and something told me this was just the surface. They thought I would stay blind forever, but I had already crossed the threshold. The moment everything stops being confusing and becomes crystal clear, that moment always changes a man, and there was no turning back after that. By the time Monday arrived, something inside me had settled into a cold, steady rhythm, not anger, precision, the kind of clarity a person reaches only after being pushed past a point they didn't know existed. I walked into the office with a calm that felt almost artificial, like stepping into a room already staged for a scene only I knew was about to play out. I started early before anyone else showed up and opened the discrepancy folder I'd built over the weekend. It wasn't just a list anymore, it was a map, a full sequence of decisions, transactions, approvals, and edits, each one pointing toward the same conclusion. Mark and Patterson weren't improvising. They had a system, a method. And I had enough data to trace it all the way back to the first time they used my department as a quiet dumping ground. But documenting wasn't enough anymore. I needed every file secured in places they couldn't reach. So I started duplicating. Not illegally, just smart. All the exports I had access to stayed within policy, but I synced them to an off-site corporate drive under my name that only compliance and audit could access. Most employees didn't even know those folders existed, much less how to route documents there. I learned about them during onboarding and remembered every detail because that's who I was. The kind of employee they underestimated precisely because I didn't advertise what I knew. By 9, the office filled with normal chatter. People laughing, coffee machines hissing, shoes tapping across carpet. Mark showed up with his usual fake friendly smile and patted my desk lightly. "Ready for the briefing later?" "Always," I said. He didn't hear the difference in my tone. Of course he didn't. Men like him only listen for what affects them. Everything else is background noise. I opened the budget file Mark wanted clean, and instead of correcting it the way he expected, I saved a full version history note, documenting every edit I found suspicious. Not conclusions, just questions. Carefully worded, professional, impossible to twist. Then, with a neutral face, I sent him a message. "Could you clarify these entries? Dates appear inconsistent. Want to present accurate numbers. Simple, polite, innocent. Except now I wanted him to notice. I needed to see what he'd do." He replied 2 minutes later, "Just finalize it. Don't overthink. We'll discuss later." That sentence told me everything. He already felt pressure. Something in the air had shifted for him, too. He just didn't know where the pressure was coming from yet. Around noon, I printed the documents I needed. Not for Mark, but for the audit committee. And I didn't carry them in a folder. I put them inside a sealed internal envelope with a routing slip. No one questions sealed envelopes in corporate environments. They're like ghosts, always seen, never interrogated. I walked straight past Mark's office to the mailroom and placed it in the bin designated for executive routing. The moment it left my hand, something clicked inside me. There was no thrill, no panic, just a steady understanding that the wheel had started turning, and I wasn't going to be the one crushed under it this time. When I returned to my desk, the office felt different. The noise seemed thinner, like a room holding its breath. Mark passed by twice in 10 minutes, pretending to check on other people. He looked at my monitors each time. I knew. He felt something slipping. He came to my desk around 2 p.m. "Hey, got a second?" I followed him to the small conference room. He closed the door behind us. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "So, what's with all the questions today? Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I answered. "Just cleaning inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies." He repeated the word like a challenge. "What inconsistencies?" I showed him the list. Not the full one, just enough to make him react. His jaw tightened, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "These are normal adjustments," he said quickly. "Everybody does them. Don't read too much into it. I'm not reading into anything. I'm just documenting what I see." He froze for half a second, then forced a chuckle. "You've been here long enough to trust my calls. Don't start doubting them now." There it was, a crack. A tiny one, but a crack. And the moment I saw it, a new realization hit me like a cold wave. He wasn't confident. He wasn't protected. He was terrified of the wrong people finding out what he'd been doing. He left the room almost too fast. I knew where he was going, even before I saw him through the glass wall, walking toward the CFO's office with his shoulders pulled up tight. That was the moment I understood the real depth of the situation. They weren't in control of anything anymore. They were reacting, and people who react make mistakes. The rest of the day moved slower. Mark avoided my desk. Patterson didn't make eye contact when he walked past. He closed his office door for the first time in weeks. Employees whispered about the sudden silence in the finance wing, a silence that never meant peace, only trouble. I didn't need rumors to confirm it. Around 4 p.m., I received an automatic system notification, one I had set up the night before. The audit folder's access log. Someone had tried opening the uploaded documents. Access denied. They didn't have clearance. That moment, that small, silent notification, felt like a release. The man they thought was harmless was suddenly holding evidence they couldn't touch, and they knew it. For the first time since overhearing their conversation, I felt the balance shift. Later that evening, as the office emptied, I gathered everything else. Timeline summaries, expense comparisons, screenshots of approval histories, copies of emails, not presented as accusations, as irregularities, patterns, questions that needed answers, questions only an audit team could legally address. When I left the building, the sky was already dark. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the windows of the office. A few lights still on, silhouettes of Mark and Patterson pacing their rooms. The sight didn't feel victorious. It felt inevitable, because somewhere in that building someone had already opened my envelope, and because silence, the heavy, tense kind that settles after truth starts moving, always means something has gone wrong for the people who counted on staying unseen. I drove home without checking my phone. I didn't need updates. I had set everything in motion, and the wheel was moving exactly the way it needed to. For the first time in months, I slept without waking up. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. The investigation didn't explode overnight. Corporate investigations never do. They unfold like slow-moving storms. Quiet at first, then heavy, then undeniable. And when they finally break, they don't make noise. They make consequences. That's the thing people like Mark and Patterson never understand. They're so used to pulling strings in the open that they forget the quiet rooms have the longer memories than the loud ones. 2 days after I sent the documents, an email hit the company-wide inbox. Quarterly audit review. Mandatory cooperation required. Just one sentence. Formal, sterile. Nothing dramatic. But the tone was unmistakable. Every department head knew what it meant. Every director knew where it pointed. And Mark froze when he saw it. He called a quick touch-base meeting with the team that afternoon, pretending everything was normal. His voice cracked twice. My coworkers didn't seem to register it, but I heard every small tremor like it was under a microscope. He tried to act confident, giving instructions that didn't actually matter, like he was trying to build a cage around himself using words. He didn't look at me once. Later that same day, I was quietly summoned to a room I'd never been in before. The executive compliance suite. It wasn't ominous. It was structured, calm. A woman from internal audit sat across from me, a stack of papers to her left and a laptop to her right. "Thank you for your documentation," she said first, not even pretending she didn't know I'd sent it. "We need clarification on your notes." Not accusations. Clarifications. I walked her through everything. Dates, transactions, the edits I'd found, the timestamp inconsistencies. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I didn't interpret the motives. I gave her exactly what the documents showed. Facts. The truth didn't need decoration. It simply needed daylight. When we finished, she closed her notebook, folded her hands neatly, and said, "We'll follow up. You've done the correct thing." I walked out with a strange sense of calm, like I'd finally returned something that never belonged to me. The weight I'd been carrying had been passed to the right set of hands. That evening, Mark was pacing the hallway outside the CFO's office. Their voices slipped through the closed door, not the loud kind, but the controlled, tense whispers of two men who finally understood. Their world wasn't as covered as they thought. When I passed by, Mark stopped pacing, looked at me for the first time in days, and opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. He didn't. The next morning, everything shifted. At 9:17 a.m., an email from HR went out. CFO Patterson will be stepping away from his role effective immediately. Interim leadership to be announced. No explanation, no farewell message. Just gone. Erased cleanly, the way the company always handles people who become liabilities. The office went silent for 20 full seconds, the longest stretch of quiet I'd ever experienced in that building. Then at 9:29 a.m., my phone buzzed. A meeting invite, one-on-one, HR plus COO, immediate. I walked in expecting procedural questions. Instead, the COO shook my hand, firm and direct. "Your documentation prevented a significant financial risk," he said. "We appreciate your diligence." HR nodded beside him, her expression neutral but respectful. "We also want to discuss your position going forward." For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. Mark wasn't invited to this meeting. The COO continued. We're restructuring operations. We'd like to move you into a lead role. You'll have full control over your budgeting process, and we'll assign support staff to rebuild your department properly. You've shown exceptional integrity. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel victory. I felt alignment, the kind you get when the world finally stops twisting itself around someone else's lies. I accept, I said simply. Afterward, HR walked me to another conference room where Mark was already sitting. He looked smaller somehow, less polished, less certain. His knee bounced under the table. He didn't look at me when I sat down. HR cleared her throat. Mark, the investigation revealed misuse of approval privileges and inappropriate management of departmental budgets. Effective today, you're being reassigned. Same salary for now, but without team oversight. Mark swallowed hard. His eyes finally met mine. There was no anger there, no superiority, just realization, the kind that arrives too late. I never meant for this to go that far, he muttered. I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. The truth didn't require my commentary. HR dismissed me after she reviewed my new role details. I walked out, leaving Mark alone in that room, staring at the table like it was the first time he'd ever seen the grain in the wood. By the end of the week, Patterson's office was emptied, his nameplate removed, his parking spot reassigned. People avoided saying his name out loud, as if mentioning him might summon his ghost. Mark kept his head down, doing work that didn't matter, tasks that didn't influence anything. His laugh disappeared, his meetings vanished from the calendar. He walked slower now, as if waiting for another shoe to drop, but it didn't. His consequences had already arrived, just quietly. Meanwhile, I sat in my new office, small but mine, arranging my files the way they should have been arranged months ago. My department budget was restored, transparent, clean. For the first time all year, I wasn't working out of a hole someone else had dug. Later that evening, I walked past the glass wall overlooking the city. Lights flickered across the skyline, each one belonging to someone living a life unaffected by what had unfolded inside these walls. A strange peace washed over me, not the shaky kind that follows conflict, the steady kind that comes when something finally stops taking from you. The company wasn't suddenly perfect, the world wasn't suddenly fair, but the scales for once had tipped the right way, and I could breathe again. Nothing felt triumphant. No adrenaline, no dramatic final line, just quiet. The kind of quiet that belongs to someone who reclaimed his place, piece by piece, without shouting, without breaking, without losing himself. People always assume revenge feels like fire. But the truth? Revenge, when it's earned honestly, feels like walking into a room you used to fear and realizing it's just a room. My story didn't end with applause or downfall. It ended with a closed door, a clean budget, a new set of keys, and a life that finally fit me the way it should have from the start. And that was enough.